Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another Beneath the Surface. We're going to give everybody just a little bit of time to log in here. So hold on just a little bit while we get everything set up, and then we're going to go ahead and get started.
You to share the cover slide, Dave? Does
Yeah, go ahead.
that sound good? Okay.
Hmm.
The slide, right? Not my presenter view.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great.
All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce everybody to Dr. Michelle Rivard. She is the Director of Animal Health and Conservation here at the Marine Mammal Care Center. And she is a veterinarian focused on clinical medicine, pathology, and health of free-ranging marine mammals. She first joined the Marine Mammal Care Center as Director of Animal Health and Conservation in November of 2024. Prior to coming to the Marine Mammal Care Center, she worked with our friends up in Washington at SR3, providing medical management and care of aquatic wildlife, performing post-mortem exams, and participating in ongoing research projects. Michelle attended the veterinary school at Michigan State University. I don't know if Michigan's been in the news lately or anything, but I hear it's a good school. They spent
That's the other school.
That's the other school.
Yeah.
And spent years in the U.S. Army Corps after graduation. During this time, she provided veterinary care for the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security military working dogs, as well as service members' pets. In addition, Michelle is responsible for the installation of public health and food safety initiatives. So we are very lucky to have Dr. Rivard as one of our most valuable team members, and I'm really excited to hear about the research that she has supported on Sable Island. And without further ado, for all of the Michigans that are out there in the world, we will have you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. Are you able to hear me okay?
You're good.
Perfect. Thank you. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a research project that myself and Dr. Madison Peters have had the privilege of participating in over the past 4 years, mostly focused around gray seals on a little slice of land in Sable Island, Canada. So just to give you some background information on the location, before we get started into this the seal business. Sable Island is a small island about 190 miles southeast of Halifax, Nova Scotia. So this is Atlantic Canada. If you can see that map on the bottom or on the side of the screen there, Nova Scotia is just northeast to New England, so not too far from Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and it's part of the Maritimes. Sable Island is this crescent-shaped island. It's essentially a sandbar with some dunes on it that's 190 miles off the coast of Halifax. It's very, very windy, has frequent precipitation, so snow and rain. And it's about 42 kilometers long, so just over 20 miles long, and it's actually less than 1 kilometer wide. It's known as the graveyard of the Atlantic, and the reason for that is because the Sable Island sits right on the edge of the Scotian Shelf, where you have really, really deep water, and then it becomes pretty shallow rather quickly. So it's an area that's famous for shipwrecks, and there's been a lot of shipwrecks there over the centuries. And it actually used to be inhabited by people. There were several life-saving stations out there because of the number of shipwrecks that were seen. But now we'll get into it in a minute. But now it's actually really only inhabited year-round by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, as well as Parks Canada, who kind of maintain and run the island. Um, and as you can imagine, it's not the most accessible. Even though in theory you can get there by boat, you really have to have some sort of landing craft or smaller boat to access it. So the way that we get there, and the way a majority of our colleagues get there, is actually through the air. So either a helicopter or an airplane. So these are just a couple of videos that we have, aerial footage for flying off with a helicopter. So whether it's with the Canadian Coast Guard or a chartered civilian helicopter, we usually get on and off the island that way. Or this video on the right here is actually our fixed wing aircraft that we'll take with us because we can take more people, more equipment, more gear that way. And because there is not an airport on Sable Island, we refer to South Beach at low tide as Terminal 1. So that's actually the Twin Otter fixed wing aircraft taking a look and surveying the beach before it makes a landing. So they usually loop around one more time just to make sure there's no seals in the way, no puddles in the way. But in order to get there, it's really involves taking either a helicopter or a fixed wing aircraft and landing on the beach at low tide. As I mentioned, Sable Island is sometimes, beautiful, nice, gorgeous, and sunny. It's an island, so it tends to be a little bit warmer than mainland Nova Scotia. So this is one of those beautiful days with one of our wonderful friends. Her name's Liz. She's a biologist for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And sometimes we have days that look just like this, where you're coming home on the beach at low tide. We use ATVs to get around the island because there's no vehicles and there's no roads. So really, the only traffic you have to worry about are seals, as you can see from this photo. So we traverse the island and get around the island on ATVs because we have to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And some days we're lucky enough to have days like this where your commute home is this nice low tide and sunset with clear skies. But then more often than not, Sable Island looks like this. So I don't know if you can appreciate it from this photo. Lots of snow, lots of rain. Sometimes your transportation fails you. So this is some of us digging our ATV out of a bunch of snow after it got stuck. Sand and snow don't mix well together, and especially with the ATVs. And then sometimes you come outside and you find that it had snowed and there's some creatures guarding your vehicle. So that was one of those mornings where our ATV was left outside and there was a gray seal pup guarding it. So reminds me of where I grew up when you have to clean your car off after a snowstorm. So as far as facilities go, Sable Island is run and maintained by Parks Canada. It's basically the Canadian version of the National Park Service. So Parks Canada has one compound with several different buildings there. They have a staff of usually 3 to 4 people there at a time. Usually basically to oversee the flights on and off the island. The wintertime, it tends to be a lot slower. So really the only people on the island in the winter are the biologists studying seals, as well as the folks from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. However, in the summertime, it is a national park. It's maintained as a national park. It's run by Parks Canada. So you can actually visit Sable Island. It's just you have to charter your own helicopter or plane to get there. So that's another major part of the Parks Canada staff, is they're making sure that the tourists that come out for day trips are able to get there safely, and they coordinate all of those flights. So again, in the wintertime, it's mostly field biologists working on gray seals. In the summertime, there tends to be more people staying at Parks Canada that are looking into the horses that call the island home, as well as some other scientists that do research on dune grass and things like that. And then Fisheries and Oceans Canada is the group that I collaborate with. They're essentially the Canadian version of NOAA. So they manage and oversee fisheries, as well as anything associated with the fisheries that lives, in the ocean. So they have had a field station on Sable Island, the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, or DFO, for over 40 years. They have 2 different field stations. They have one larger one on the west side of the island, which you can see in the bottom right photo there. That's an aerial photo of Westlight is what we call it. And then the other smaller field station is at the east end of the island. Um, and it's an interesting place to call home. We're lucky because it has indoor plumbing. Now there's Starlink, so there's even internet. And it has kind of all the amenities you'd have in a regular house, stove, things to cook on, even your, guard dog in the driveway, if you can appreciate that in the bottom left photo. There's an adult male gray seal hanging out in our driveway. So that one's a little bit more well equipped and can sleep anywhere between 7 to 9 people, whereas their other field station is a little bit smaller and can sleep about four on the east end of the island. So this is the most exciting part of Sable Island to me is the wildlife. There's about 350 species of migratory birds that pass through the island or call the island home. So it's a really important stopover for birds. There's also about 500 wild horses that live on the island. And those horses were actually brought there by humans in the late 1800s because, as I said earlier, there used to be an actual population of people that lived on the island because of those life-saving stations. So they actually brought the horses over. People brought the horses over, but then they turned into wild horses now that there's no long-term permanent residents on the island. But the part that we're here to talk about tonight is that Sable Island is home to the world's largest breeding colony of gray seals. So there's about 400,000, so nearly 500,000 gray seals come to Sable Island each winter in order to pup and nurse their pups and breed. So in addition to the gray seals, there are other species of marine mammals on the island. They're much less frequented. Sometimes we'll see harbor seals. There's stranded cetaceans or dolphins and whales we'll see sometimes on the island, and sea turtles, as well as other species of seals, most notably ice seals. So those animals in the middle and on the top right, those are both harp seals. And then the animal on the bottom right, he may look like a harper seal, but that's actually a hooded seal pup. So we will see some other species of seals and sea lions on the island, but in by far and away, gray seals are the species that most commonly live there as far as the pinnipeds go. And I just had to show this video because this is kind of the quintessential Sable Island video that you think about when you roll up on the beach and you see the wild horses and the large groups of gray seals during breeding season. So there's only 500 horses and they get a lot of attention, especially from the Canadians and Nova Scotians. Everybody asks about the wild horses, and we say, well, yeah, there's horses there, but we're really there to work with the gray seals. So in general, they cohabitate pretty peacefully. They don't bother each other too much. But this is sort of what we get to see every day, which is pretty unremarkable and really lucky to be able to work in a place like this. So just to talk a little bit about gray seals and their life history, gray seals inhabit the North Atlantic. There's three different stocks. So there's the eastern stock of gray seals, which inhabits Europe, Ireland, and Western Europe. There's the Western Atlantic stock, which is what we see off of our coast here. So in New England area, ranging all the way up into Canada, and then the Baltic Sea, which is a much smaller stock. Gray seals live quite a long time for marine mammals, or for pinnipeds, I should say, about 25 to 35 years. And they're pretty indiscriminate eaters. They'll eat fish, crustaceans, squid. It really varies by seasonality, by what's available, by their age, the region. And as far as reproduction goes, most of the pups that are born on Sable Island are born in the last week of December. So peak pupping is the last week of December, right between Christmas and New Year's. And moms nurse their pups for about 18 days before they wean them and head back off to sea. And the males and females will typically breed right around the time of weaning. So in these photos here on the left, the two on the left, top and bottom, are mom and gray seal pup pairs. So the gray seal pups are born with this long white fluffy coat called lanugo. And that lanugo is lost around the time that they wean. So again, gray seals wean about 3 weeks of age, and then they'll molt and they'll have this nice, beautiful, sleek coat that you can see on the right. Those are two freshly molted and weaned gray seal pups. And it's really interesting while we're there because we spend about 6 weeks on this island during the field season. And it's fun to see the changes when, you have a colony full of moms with really tiny little fluffy white pups, like they're on the left. And then around the time that we're wrapping up our field season, a lot of the adults are gone, and you have these weaned gray seal pups that are exploring their environment. And they're quite funny because they're really curious and interested in figuring out what's going on. So we find them all kinds of places. This photo on the left here is right outside of our house at Westlight. It's a satellite tag gray seal pup that was hanging out for a while right by the satellite dish, but we'll constantly come outside. There's another one actually back here by the porch. So it's funny because you come outside and you almost step on them because they'll be in the driveway, they'll be on the porch. They kind of are everywhere. And then they'll hang out in these larger groups as well on the beaches. So you'll have the beaches at the end of the breeding season that are just kind of full of all these weaned pups. And this is one of my favorite videos that I couldn't get through this presentation without showing you guys. Is a little gray seal weaned pup that's out there looking for trouble. So when people ask if the horses and the gray seals interact, this is the video that I always like to show them. So if you can see, that pup is like thinking about, should I taste this? And then he does, and he nibbles on that horse, and the horse takes off. So yeah, it's really probably more the weaned pups that are harassing the horses more than anything else. So one of the really special things about Sable Island is it's really the only marine mammal population where we're able to study this large of a portion of the population this reliably and consistently. So there are other, longitudinal studies looking at marine mammal populations and their overall health and ecology and longevity and things like that. But the thing that's really cool about Sable Island is that 80% of the gray seal population in the Western Atlantic, so 80% of the gray seals that we see along the coast of the United States and Canada, breed and pup on Sable Island. So it really allows scientists to come up with or to learn a lot about the population as a whole, to learn about trends in the population. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And some of the things that are impacting survivability of these animals, weaning mass. So it's a really unique study population because we're able to look at such a large subset of the population over a short period of time. And this is just a very, very small amount of publications and research that have come out of this field work program. So because we spend a lot of time working on these animals, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the scientific programs and research that come out of this work. But first, I kind of wanted to sort of set the scene for all of you because, this is very different than working in a hospital setting or even in a rehabilitation setting because we truly are out in the field handling the animals. So most of the time we're working in a place that looks like this on the bottom right on a beach. That's a pretty sunny day actually. And that's a pup that I was monitoring. He was resting his head on my boot while he was recovering from sedation. But that photo in the middle, it's difficult to appreciate that pup with the goggles on. That was the day we were out in the field and had like 40 knot winds. So that's why everybody has goggles on because the sand is just blowing everywhere. I ended up putting a pair of goggles on the pup because he was sedated and I didn't want him to get a bunch of sand in his eyes. But we're frequently dealing with really cold temperatures, really high winds. Sometimes we'll work in the garage. That photo in the top left, we had to satellite tag a bunch of weaned pups. So rather than doing it out in the field, we were able to find enough near the East Light garage. So we brought them inside, and just having that break from the wind is a game changer when it comes to handling these animals and making sure that sand doesn't get into everything. But sometimes you don't always get a choice to do that, and you don't always have a structure to work in, which is what happens a majority of the time. And this video down here on the bottom left is actually when we went out um, in the middle of a snowstorm, kind of to recover a satellite tag. So, it's important that when these animals come ashore, if we have equipment that we want to recover from them, um, if they're there, we try to get out and recover it because they could always leave. So this was a pretty snowy, blowy day out on the West Spit. And Damien, who's one of the DFO biologists, is trying to track and find that seal using a VMT transmitter so that we could catch her sedator and get her satellite tag off. So when they don't have a pup that they're nursing, they don't tend to stick around as long. So sometimes we find ourselves out in some pretty cold weather. So now I'll talk a little bit about some of the research programs that come out of the Sable Island group. So there's a population ecology program that's really started and run by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, or DFO. And that's really the most important foundation of any of this gray seal work. Because this program has sort of that longitudinal information and biologists that have been working in this program for a very long time. So this population ecology program was founded over 40 years ago. So there have been scientists from DFO that have been going to Sable Island every winter to study gray seals. So sort of the crux of this program is a mark and recite program. So they will permanently mark or brand a subset of pups at the time of weaning. And some of those pups they follow throughout the duration of their life. So these animals, when they return to Sable Island each year and we see their brand, we're able to know how old these animals are, how many pups they've had, what years they've had their pups, information like pup weaning masses. So that's really a big crux of the program. So a big portion of our time out there is spent what we call brand reciting. So there's a group of usually 10 to 12 people of DFO and their collaborators, and we'll brand recite the entire island, so all 42 kilometers, about once every 5 days. So we're able to cover that amount of ground on our ATVs. And what we do is we all split up. We sort of are assigned different parts of the island, and we look at every single seal on the island to look for brands. So it kind of looks a little bit like this, where we're just driving up and down the beach, and sometimes it's the beach, sometimes it's in the dunes. So the dunes are a little bit less fun than the beach. But driving around to look for these branded animals, because that really important recite data is how we learn more about how the individual animal is doing and how the population is doing as a whole. And by reciting these animals every year, we can use statistical models to extrapolate on how the population is doing. And then again, like I said, with the subset of the animals, they're called life history animals. Those are all female animals. So if you can see in the middle picture, there's a female. She's been dyed pink and has a pup with her. So there's a subset of these females that are branded that we add to what we call the circuit. So we go back and we check on these females and their pups every single day. So we know what day the female gives birth to her pup. And then we know what day the female weans her pup. So after the adult female weans her pup, we catch the pup, we weigh the pup and get a weaning mass. And then after we're all done looking at them for the season, and after the pup is weaned, we mark them again. Damien down there on the bottom marks them with some blue livestock paste so that we know that that pup is already weaned and we've already worked it up or assessed it. So that really is what helps to get some of this really robust population data. And it also helps us to learn a little bit more about not only how the moms are doing, but how the pups are doing. We know that pup survivability is heavily dependent upon weaning mass. And we also know that The pup's weaning mass is heavily dependent upon the mom's availability to, to lactate and provide nutrients that that pup needs to survive. So all of that information is really important on us learning about how the health of the gray seals are doing as a whole, and how that year's sort of cohort will fare based on their weight. Um, Another thing that DFO does in order to get a better idea of how the population is doing, or a population census, is they'll conduct aerial surveys. So they'll do aerial surveys about every 5 years, and they try to fly these aerial surveys during peak pupping season. So these are a couple of aerial photos. You can see that photo on the left. There's some gray seals there on the beach. So they'll fly either a fixed wing or a helicopter, and basically count how many animals there are during peak pupping. So that also helps to give an overall population estimate that they can use to figure in to the statistical modeling as well. Another important part of what we do on Sable Island is learn more about the movement of these animals. So we place a lot of satellite tags on animals depending on different research projects and sort of what we're looking at. So most recently, what DFO was looking into was sort of the longevity of weaned pups, or how long weaned pups survive and where they're foraging at. And the reason for that is because they've had quite high pup mortality over the past couple of years. Somewhere between 80 to 90% of pups don't live past their first year. So they're trying to figure out why and where these pups are foraging. The hypothesis is that these pups are having to travel longer to forage, and are having some difficulty finding those foraging grounds. So they're trying to we're trying to get a better idea of where these pups are traveling after they wean. And you can see there's some of that satellite tag data in this image here. So in general, the pups that transmit longer tend to hang out. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but right here along the Scotian shelf. So where the water goes from being deep to really shallow, those tend to be more nutrient high areas, areas of upwelling, and tend to have more prey availability for them. Whereas some of these pups that swam a little bit further off, into the deeper parts of the ocean, likely were struggling to find food. So being able to look at these movement patterns from not just pups, but also adult animals as well, helps us to figure out where they're foraging and to draw some conclusions about that. Something else I wish I had a video to show you, but I don't, that's really cool, is camera work. So some of the DFO biologists will actually instrument adult animals with not just satellite tags, but an actual camera that goes on their back, like this animal on the right. And that allows them to learn more about their interaction with conspecifics, so how they behave towards other seals, and also some predator-prey interaction. So they've actually had a couple of animals come in where they were able to get data from these from the camera animals on how they're avoiding white sharks. So they can look at the satellite tag data from the tag that's on their head to look at how deep they're diving, how fast they're moving, and where they're going, and pair that with some of the camera data that they get from their back to see how they're evading white sharks. And they actually have caught on some of these gray seal cameras white sharks on these cameras. So we learned a little bit more about white sharks and how they're the gray seals probably #1 predator outside of humans, but also how they are avoiding them and what those interactions look like. So that's a pretty cool work that's come out of Sable Island as well. Something else that we're looking out there are different diet studies. We know that the health of these animals, as well as how robust they are and their ability to not just conceive, but also carry a pup to term and raise successful offspring, has a lot to do with the health of the female and how robust she is. So learning more about the foraging ecology of adult females where they're eating and what they're eating has been a large focus for this group, because we know that what mom eats can have an impact on pups' weaning mass. So what we're able to do is actually take blubber samples from those adult females to learn a little bit more about their diet, and then we can compare that with the weaning mass of these life history pups, or the pups that are born to those diet moms. And then another project they're looking on as it relates to diet are with these adult females. We call them redheads. So these are all adult females that have this sort of red pelage on their head. And they're not born with that. That's something that they actually acquire. And they get that from foraging in benthic areas in, clay, and they have basically from rubbing their heads in the dirt at the bottom of the ocean. And then what happens is when they come to the surface, that iron that they acquire oxidizes and it turns their pelage red. So these animals are foraging in a different environment because they're foraging in a benthic environment in the dirt, or in the dirt, clay, mud at the bottom of the ocean, compared with the gray seals that don't have red heads. So that's something else that we're looking into to see if the redheads, because they have a different foraging strategy, if that has any impact on their well as the mass of their pups. So that's something else that we're investigating, and we don't have the results from that back yet. And then the reason that I was sort of brought into this project is to help out with some of this physiology work. So they needed a veterinarian in the field to help safely immobilize animals for some physiology work that they're doing. I also help out on some of the other sample collection as well. But what this physiology group out of Texas Tech University and what Toll is looking at is iron metabolism and how the impact of iron transfer from mom to pup. So they're looking to see if the iron that is passed on from the mom and her milk to the pup, if that has any impact on the pup's total red blood cells or on the pup's diving physiology. So in order to do that, we have to immobilize the animals. We take a lot of samples to include blood, blubber, muscle biopsy. We take a little bit of hair, vibrissa, milk from the mom. We do a lot of different measurements as well. So on the top right, we're taking morphometrics from a gray seal pup that's been sedated. The bottom right, you can see some of the graduate students are taking blubber depth measurements using an ultrasound. So we'll take blubber depth measurements, as well as the morphometrics, and collect all different kinds of samples on these animals. And then in addition to that, we'll place, or this past year, we started to place heart rate loggers on some of the mom pup pairs as a way to measure their heart rate in a non-invasive manner. And then once we handle the pups, we handle the mom pup pairs at day 3 and day 12. So when the pups are 3 days old and 12 days old, so we're able to recover those heart rate loggers at day 12 and plug them into a computer, and we can look at things like the mom and pup's heart rate, their waveforms, so EKG, to see if they have any rhythm abnormalities, and some things like that. So that was something new that we did this year, that we still sort of have to analyze the data for. But handling these animals during these physiology handlings really provides us with the opportunity to learn a little bit more about some of this monitoring equipment and ways that we can use it in a non-invasive way in wild species. Something else that we do is surveillance for different diseases. Most recently, as I'm sure most of you have heard of, avian influenza has been in the news a lot. It's a disease that's mostly transmitted or carried by birds, but there are occasionally spillover events from birds into mammals. So it's happened in dairy cattle and cats, happening currently on the West Coast here, from birds into elephant seals. Performing this avian influenza surveillance is really important. So any seal that we handle, that our team handles, whether it's a physiology animal or a diet animal, we take a swab and we run a PCR for influenza virus on those samples. Excuse me. And then also, if there's any sort of robust, healthy looking adult seals that are found dead on the rookery, we'll swab them as well. And this year there was actually a group out there from Parks Canada that was swabbing birds too. So really important emerging infectious zoonotic disease. And Sable Island is a great place to do this type of surveillance because such a large amount of the gray seal population is located there, especially at the same time when there's a lot of birds for a migratory stopover. So there's definitely a ton of birds that could potentially transmit this virus to seals. So that's why it's so important to do that surveillance. And this seal does not have influenza, but I just had to include this video because it's cute. The little gray seal pup sneeze. Um, some other work that is being done on the island are some different longevity studies. So one of the researchers from University of Alaska and his postdoc are collecting DNA from known aged animals and pups. So again, these life history animals, we know how old they are because they were branded as a weaned pup. So what he's actually doing is collecting a skin sample from these known aged pups and looking at telomeres and the role that it plays in a gray seal's lifespan. So telomeres are located on the end of our chromosomes, and they get a little bit shorter every time our cells undergo cell division. And the hypothesis is that gray seals have perhaps a different mechanism of like telomere division, perhaps that they lose a little bit less at the time of cell division because they are a really long-lived species and they don't tend to get many degenerative diseases that we see. So, for example, like this year we had a couple of gray seal moms that were 38 years old and still giving birth to pups. So trying to learn a little bit more about these animals that have a really long lifespan. So this is actually how we collect the samples. It's a little biopsy punch that we put basically on the end of a stick. And we try to do it as non-invasive as possible so that we don't have to actually handle the animals. So this is Liz taking a skin sample. Oh, don't mind my commentary. So that's Liz taking that skin sample from that adult female. So even though she wasn't a huge fan of it, it still is pretty non-invasive, and it's just a tiny little nick in the top of the skin that allows us to look at their DNA. And then I talked about this a little bit already, but the part that myself and Madison really played in all of this work is coming up with sort of the safest way to handle these animals that makes it, safe and minimizes stress for the moms and the pups and all the animals that we handle, and also makes it safe for the scientists who are wanting to do work with them. So these are a couple of the projects that we're working on, trying to figure out the best drug combination to utilize in these animals. Because kind of what we're finding is there are certain drugs that work better for short-term immobilizations. There are certain drugs that work better in the pups, and then there are certain drugs that work better in the adults. So that's kind of what all of this is talking about, is the different medications that we use. Whenever you're talking about sedating or anesthetizing an animal in a field environment, it really is helpful to have drugs that are reversible because you're away from a hospital. You don't have an anesthesia machine. You don't have a lot of the sort of emergency equipment that you would utilize if you had a crashing animal or an animal that didn't do well. So being able to sedate or anesthetize animals in the field is quite different because you're away from a hospital. So one of the things that we've really wanted to focus on is utilizing drugs that are reversible. So if we're seeing any bad side effects or things not go well, we're able to reverse those medications and the animals can be safe. This guy at the top is not under sedation. He's just yawning. And then that's Madison down there in the bottom, giving an animal, like an adult female gray seal, some IV medications before we let her out of the net. And well, you may wonder why we need to sedate them. The adults are pretty fractious, but you think the pups must be pretty innocent as well. And sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. And they can get pretty fractious and angry and unruly. So this is me trying to get some more drugs for this gray seal who's gray seal pup who's clearly not sedated enough. She's only 12 days old, I believe, at this point, but is still quite feisty and was yanking on my boot as I was trying to get drugs for her. So it's just much better circumstances for us and for them if we're able to sedate them and handle them safely because it makes things much less stressful. And then that kind of covers most of the research and things like that that we are looking into with these animals. But a question that I get asked a lot is, how do you catch a gray seal? Because it's different than catching a California sea lion or an elephant seal or a harbor seal. Um, so this is actually a video of Damien. He's one of the DFO biologists. He got his PhD on Sable Island and has been coming to Sable Island for decades. Um, so this is a mom pup pair that we're capturing to do some of the diet study analysis that we talked about. And the moms tend to not flee when they have a pup. You know, they're really good moms. They want to protect their pup. As you can see, she wants nothing to do with Damien. Um, so, so you can see him kind of maneuvering her around until we can get to a safe place to capture her. And then we basically throw the net over their nose and put a lot of weight on their back because they're really good at backing up. And then after we have them in the net, we tie the back part of the net back towards here. And then sort of weave them together. So that allows us to sort of safely restrain them. And once they're kind of tucked up in the net, they tend to be fairly calm, usually even calm enough to give an IV injection if you need to give drugs intravenously. Most of the drugs that we give are intramuscular, but we also do a lot of intravenous injection. And then we are able to weigh them. So this photo on the right here is a tripod with a scale and a winch attached to it. So we're able to hook that winch onto the bars of the net and get an accurate weight on an adult animal. And that's really important because some of the drugs that we're using are pretty concentrated, and we want to make sure that we're dosing them appropriately. So we weigh every mom or every adult animal and every pup before we sedate them with the medications. So yeah, that's kind of more about what this looks like. Ideally, we have this photo on the right here where we have a nice mom pup pair who are snoozing away. They have their heart rate loggers on their backs there. You can see our data sheets and our equipment kind of scattered all around. Um, but that's sort of the ideal scenario here. And sometimes the pup will even, um, you know, become sedate and the drugs will kick in when it's snuggled up next to mom. So that's always what we're looking for. And this is another kind of cute video. One metric that we'll use to measure depth of sedation with the pups is if they start to snore. And it's just, there's not much cuter than a gray seal pup snoring. That video actually was dueling snores between the mom and the pup. So that's our goal is sort of safe handling where the animals are nice and calm and we're able to work around them without causing them any sort of stress. So just to talk a little bit about some of the contributions to conservation, I want to make sure that we have time for questions. But outside of all of the research projects that go into to this work, we really learn a lot from working with these animals and increasing our clinical proficiency through animal handling, how to best collect samples, what diagnostics we're able to run in the field, what drugs are working the best. And also a lot of the work that comes out of this group, we can use and share that information with others. Um, you know, in Canada, there's a lot of political discord around the fisheries and, the collapse of the cod fishery and was it the gray seal's fault? So being able to monitor these animals and get some of that diet information is really important because we can show like, no, they are in fact eating a lot of other things aside from, just cod. But we do think that the collapse of that fishery not only had an impact on commercial fisheries, but also could have an impact on marine mammals and the gray seal population as well. So with that, I just want to thank all of the collaborators on this project, as well as Marine Mammal Care Center for allowing myself and Madison to go to this remote island in the Atlantic for a couple months in the wintertime. And huge thank you for all of the wonderful field collaborators and all of the folks from DFO and graduate students and collaborators on this project. We have to live together for 6 weeks a year, and we still mostly like each other. So I feel really lucky to be in such a wonderful group of people. So yeah, with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rivard. That was amazing. I want to offer to everybody, if you have a question for Dr. Rivard about the research on Sable Island, or I guess any other questions they might have, you can put them into the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer those. We have one in here that is when you have to transport them, say to the garage for tagging, for example, do you Santa Claus them on the back of the ATV via sled of sorts?
Oh man, did I show somebody those pictures? Yeah, we do that. I didn't include them because they look a little funny. Yeah, so the adults we don't transport because there's really no moving them around. The females are usually over 200 kilograms, so like 450 pounds. But the pups, we do put them in a little pup net, and then we put them on the back of the ATV with a bunch of bungee cords. We don't go far, but we call it the puppy Uber.
Awesome.
So yeah, but we just travel like really short distances with that. Um, if they're not close to the garage and we have to go to them, then we just end up working in the snow and the wind.
Um, well, there's a lot of people saying thank you, and they're in awe of the work that you've done there, which I agree. It looks like an amazing and difficult place to work, but pretty unique place to work. Um, I noticed, a lot of different tagging, coloring, all of that kind of stuff. How long does, say, a satellite tag stay on the animal, or how long does that dye stay on the animal?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the tag. And I didn't get as into this. I have a lot more that I could talk about. I could talk forever about this stuff. But the satellite tags are epoxy to their head. Ideally, those would stay on until they molt. And one of the cool things about DFO and the work that they do is they have a really high sat tag retention rate because the animals come back. So they try to place the tags right after the molt, usually in the fall, because if they molt and they lose their hair, the tag will come off. So in general, they'll place them in the late summer, early fall, and then we'll try to recover those tags in January during the breeding season. So they'll get about 4 months before we recover them. But in general, the transmission time can vary depending on how the programming is and how well the person is at how well a job the person epoxying it did. That pink dye, we actually dye them with it's like a dish soap bottle on the back of our ATV. So when we're driving by and we see a life history animal and it's an animal we want to make sure we're checking on each day, we'll come back and squirt them with pink dye, usually every couple days, because it's just like it's a water-based thing and it rinses off in the rain. And then we also flipper tag them, similar to the animals that we have in care here. And those flipper tags will hopefully stay in for the lifetime of the animal, but they can tear out. Oh, Kate's here. Hi,
Yeah.
Kate.
And Kate has a question.
Yeah.
Do the pups shed their lanugo fur after you mark them with the paint, making it harder to find them?
Yeah. Oh, Kate's my friend from SR3 up in Washington. I'm so glad that you came to listen, Kate. Um, yeah, so that is a great question, and it gets very tricky because when the pups are all white Lanugo, that pink dye shows up on them really well. But because they molt around the time that they wean, sometimes what you're looking for is like a pup that's black and fully molted with a little patch of white hair that's been dyed pink on it, and it can be really frustrating to find them. We do tag them all, so the pups don't get a flipper tag as well, but it can be tough to spot those flipper tags. So yes, that's why we check on them every single day. And if they look like they're moving further and further away from mom the day before, we try to really have the same person go back. But we do spend some time searching for weaned pups because they can travel.
We have a question about what is the biggest concern for this species in the wild?
Yeah, I that's a good question. Gray seals have a lot of the similar threats that most pinnipeds face out here on the West Coast. Certainly entanglement, human interaction types of cases. Um, the thing that we're seeing the most in these animals is really high pup mortality. So 80 to 90% pup mortality. And a lot of that is probably because the pups aren't able to forage appropriately on their own. So similar issues with what we can see out here in malnourished sea lion pups is either trouble finding fish or not enough fish to eat.
Okay. Another question people had was what impact do people have? You mentioned entanglements. Um, I'm assuming these are animals that were hunted for blubber or for culling for fisheries or something like that. Do we know about their historical and current population sizes?
Yeah, their population has grown since the Marine Mammal Protection Act, like most other marine mammal or pinniped populations have at least. So there's about a 500,000 gray seals in the Western Atlantic. So their population is doing quite well overall, but it's becoming more and more aged. So what we're seeing are some of these life history animals as they're getting older, they're starting to die off. And we're seeing much higher pup mortality now when compared with even like 10 years ago. So even if there's somewhere between 450 to 500,000 gray seals out there, with pup mortality being that high, it's not going to stay that high for very long. Um,
What is the
so
rate you said of pup mortality?
it's been 80 to 90% of gray
Wow.
seal pups don't survive past a year of age. Um, so yeah, that's quite high. And it can change from year to year, and it can be dependent upon a variety of different environmental factors. Um, it's fortunate that we're able to get this comprehensive data on gray seals because we don't have really that kind of data on California sea lions to know what their pup mortality is each year. But I would speculate it's not been great with these domoic acid blooms out here. Um, yeah, but there can be some variation from year to year, just depending on environmental conditions. But the fact that it has been that high for the past couple of years is not, it is indicative that the population will experience a decline in the future.
We have a couple questions about what it's like to live on the island. What are the conditions? How do you get provisions? That sort of thing. And is there anything similar to what you're doing on Sable Island on the West Coast, like other research projects where people like yourself are wanted and needed?
Yeah, so as far as the conditions, it is a beautiful island. Sometimes we have sunny days and weather as nice as like 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but usually we're outside working in temperatures that are around freezing, sometimes a little bit below freezing in the rain or the snow or the wind or all of the above. Um, but once you go inside, so we always come inside for lunch. We tend to just, work for outside for 4 to 5 hours at a time, come inside for lunch, and then go back out because you really start to get pretty cold if you're outside much longer than that. And all of our provisions we bring with us. So interesting things happen when flights are delayed and you're trying to figure out what to make for dinner, and it turns into kind of like a Top Chef situation where it's like, what can I make with, a ham and some onions, or actually we're usually out of onions. So yeah, it's interesting. You have to shop and bring everything with you, and invariably we forget something every year, and we beg Parks Canada to put it on a tourist flight or something like that. But it's a lot of planning.
Um, Elizabeth is asking if there's anybody who monitors the horses on the island for their needs, care, veterinary needs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that do horse work. They usually come out in the summer. Um, so I have not interacted with many of them, but they monitor like horse populations. They collect a lot of horse poop to look at parasites and things like that. But in general, the horse population has been pretty stable at around 500 or so horses. And I realized I didn't answer the question about the West Coast.
Oh, great.
Yes, there are programs like that on the West Coast here in the United States. Um, Probably the one I'm most familiar with, or most notably, NOAA's Marine Mammal Lab has a field station on San Miguel Island in the Channel Islands, and they do a lot of California sea lion work and northern fur seal work out there. And that's another program that has been around for a very long time. UC Santa Cruz also does a lot of monitoring of elephant seals along the coast. The elephant seal colonies are a little bit more accessible because, they're right here on our coast. You don't have to necessarily fly to an island to get there.
Um, Another question. Irene wanted to know if if all the paint and the tagging of the female or male animals make them more or less attractive to their mates.
Not at all. The male, the adult male gray seals. I didn't put many photos of adult males. I should have. The adult males don't mind at all. Yeah, they're not picky. We are pretty cautious when it comes to dyeing a really young pup. So whenever we handle the pups at 3 days of age, we usually just dye the mom and not the pup because we want to make sure that they reunite and we don't want to have any impact on that. So if it's a really young, fresh pup that's, younger than 4 or 5 days of age, we don't mess with them. We kind of just will dye the moms instead.
Um, we have a question about domoic acid, and if there's any impacts outside of here in Southern California of domoic acid on other animals. They're asking specifically about gray seals, but do we see domoic acid impacting marine mammals outside of California coast?
Short, yes, there are domoic acid blooms in other places around the world. It has been documented even further up north near Alaska. It's been documented in the Atlantic, as well as in Australia, New Zealand, places like that. We don't tend to see the large scale mass stranding events in gray seals or animals in the Atlantic. And some of that may be because there's no predator prey overlap with these harmful algal blooms, or the blooms may just be less prevalent. But there has been domoic acid detected in the feces of some of these other animals, harbor seals and gray seals as well, but they haven't shown clinical signs for it. So perhaps they're just ingesting it in much lower numbers and it's a sort of a subclinical type of thing. But we don't tend to see those large scale stranding events due to domoic acid in gray seals.
Okay, we're going to ask one last question here before we sign off. We're very worried about your health and safety and happiness while you're out on the island, and we want to know what we can send with you. The question was, has there ever been an apocalypse-like scenario where you were out of something on the island and you need it terribly? And if so, we'll make sure to pack some for you next time.
Oh my gosh, there was one year that I mean, there's so many stories like this that are it's just so funny and ridiculous, and it happens every year. But there was one year that the flights were delayed, which happens frequently because of weather. So all of the food was put in the freezer instead of in the fridge, and we didn't know until we got to the island and everything had been frozen to include like all of the vegetables and eggs.
Oh
So
no.
cooking with frozen eggs was like something we had to figure out. So it's like there's always something little like that every year. It's never perfect. But other than that, like, we're not camping. We're in a house with a bed, running water, Starlink internet. Um, the generator doesn't always work, but it does most of the time. So we have pretty good conditions. We're pretty lucky. We just have to make sure that we remember to pack everything we need.
Sounds great. Michelle, thank you so much for all of your time today and preparing this talk for us, and thank you also for doing the work. It's amazing that we get to share you with the Canadians up there doing research, and we really appreciate everything you do for us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for listening. And anyone who's here at MMCC, I'm always happy to talk more and show you lots of photos and videos. I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. I could talk about this all day.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. There'll be a recording, and we'll be sharing that out shortly. So just want to say thank you, and we'll see you on the next Beneath the Surface. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Dave.